crisis to restructure itself. But we know that one solution to one crisis buries the seeds of the next crisis. So at this very critical historical juncture, then capitalism has, or we have, three scenarios ahead of it. One is the bad capitalism. I'll briefly talk what that means. This is where we are now. The other is the model advocated by those who advocate Green New Deal, a state-led new golden age of capitalism, if you like, based on the ideas of greening the economy. I'll call that good capitalism, and I'll also discuss how feasible that it is. And then I'll hopefully conclude by very briefly touching on our alternatives, which I call an eco-socialist alternative to that bad or good capitalism. So the first scenario of bad capitalism, where we are today, is mainly starting by making the workers pay for their crises, not just the economic and financial crisis, but also for the ecological crisis. They will want to make us pay for that. Of course, at an economic level, we know that it is a dead-end road. It is generating chronically low demand. It's turning the crisis into an incomes and jobs crisis, and it's once again turning the recovery into a potential realization crisis, where Britain, for example, is trying to recover again based on the same old good debt accumulation. So a debt recovery is no recovery. On the other hand, we have countries like Germany trying to export its way out of that sort of realization crisis, but we know that not all countries can be exporters. The world economy, our planet Earth, predominantly is a closed economy, as long as they don't find a way of trading with Mars, and as long as they don't find out that there is life outside planet Earth. So they're stuck in that. Of course, China, India, Brazil, all these new, fast-growing, emerging economies cannot be the consumer of last resort. They're not big enough to absorb the demand that is being squeezed in the core countries of advanced capitalism, where workers are being squeezed and not being the consumers of the products they're producing. So in that stuck constellation, capitalism is seeing the new green investments also as a way out of their crisis. It's a new area of raising profits for them on the one hand. On the other hand, they're also stuck in their vested interests, and I think it was very important to hear from the Oxford campaign in our opening session. We are, or they are, sitting on a carbon bubble. It's the same thing as the financial bubble that they were sitting on the high growth rates of the 2000s. And we know how it ended in tears in 2007, and we're still in that great recession. Now the carbon bubble is very important. It's not just the carbon companies, it's not just the oil companies, but it's also all the other major financial or non-financial industries who are investing in also the same oil companies. If we make that bust, and it's up to us to make that bust, if we really tell them you can't really extract that fossil fuel out of the ground, you have to leave it there, they will bust big time. And that is to be a very controlled motion. If it is not controlled by the people, it will be the same financial crash as yet. And now we know how they're trying to come out of the financial crash by bailing out the banks, socializing the losses, privatizing the gains, and then again now privatizing the same big banks who generated crisis. Now out of a carbon bubble bust, they will try to come out in the same ways, but this time the socialization of losses would really mean, I think, what science fiction authors write in their dystopias. I don't want to talk too much about that, what is after a carbon bust, but obviously the reaction of capitalism to the ecological crisis is a very small, slow motion in small steps. It's not going to solve that crisis. Now, on the other hand, when they're looking into other areas of creating profitability, they're mostly looking at, of course, more profitable ways of extracting carbon or gas, so shale gas production. Obviously, it is not just taking the carbon out of the soil, but it's also creating an increase in greenhouse gas emissions in the very process of shale gas extraction through releasing all those methane gases. And of course, the earthquakes and all the rest of it is on top of that. Now, in terms of the new areas for profitability, if you look at, say, the magazines like The Economist, you always see that they see a future, maybe investing there in wind, in renewables, but this is, again, a very slow motion thing. This is still a very risky, a very unforeseeable, a very hard to anticipate future for the capitalists. It doesn't provoke their animal spirits in the same way as shale gas production provokes, for example. And the other part that provokes their animal spirits is the nuclear power. Obviously, if you look at the British clean energy moves, particularly with the Condemned government, there is a lot more about nuclear power. And I was actually shocked to see in The Guardian, after the miners' disaster, when 300 miners were killed in the coal mine in Turkey, a column in The Guardian was saying, see, we all condemn coal, but we need something as an alternative to the fossil fuels, and we shouldn't outrule the possibility of nuclear energy. So coal is bad, so nuclear energy isn't actually all that bad. It doesn't kill 300 workers. It's just a year after Fukushima. It's surprising. So a lot of interest is, of course, in nuclear power, and this is no alternative really to climate change. It's also not an efficient way of creating energy. It actually requires a lot of government subsidies. It's not profitable enough even for the capitalists. So, this is the bad capitalism. Bad capitalism will generate areas of new profit making for the capitalists. It's not going to solve the energy crisis, and we are in a very irreversible, critical route with regards to climate change and energy crisis. So, where do we go from here? Now comes the scenario of the alternative Green New Deal. That's the good capitalism scenario of people who are trying to advocate a new golden age of capitalism by turning green investments to the new machine of growth and job creation. They think that we can reconcile growth, job creation, and mitigation of ecological disaster. So here the idea is that how public investments, they don't have a lot of the good targets that we would share, like generating jobs, full employment, decent wages, also as a means of decreasing inequality. They're trying to get trade unions on board, trade union voice on board here. The idea here is very clear for these people. They understand that capitalism needs a state to save itself from itself. Capitalism needs a state for economic stability as well as political and ecological stability. So, if you like, this is the core idea of a Keynesian management of capitalism. But of course, state also limits capitalism. It has to tax capitalism, it has to redistribute, and in the meantime, as it finances investments, it also picks winners and losers among the private capitalists. Now, such a limitation is acceptable to the individual capitalists and their powerful lobbies only if they have no other choice. They have accepted that sort of a management, Keynesian management, after the Second World War. Well, it happened after a prolonged crisis, 2 world wars. Now it will happen maybe if there is an ecological disaster and wars for resources and food. Or it can happen, of course, I don't say that capitalism always needs wars for regenerating itself. It will happen after a great change in balance of power relations. So my question is, if we were to get that powerful to push the capitalists to a new compromise, to aim at economic, social, and ecological stability, why not move one step after that for a permanent change in the system and the relations of production, a permanent revolution in all terms? So I see I share a lot of the aspirations of people we're talking about in New Green Deal in terms of ecological sustainability, decent jobs, decent wages, full employment, but I think this is very naive to see that it can just happen without a major change in the balance of power relations. And if I am there, I would like to push for more. On top of that, of course, if we were able to achieve full employment, increasing investments, that would mean for capitalism declining profit rate, and it would bear the seeds of a new crisis in the long run for capitalism. Capitalism is not a stable economic system. I don't want to use too much of my time, but also we find a lot of good people advocating low growth and zero growth in these cohorts. I tell them zero growth is not consistent with capitalism. I share the aspiration of zero growth, but zero growth means also actually no profit rate. So I'm not going to go into the theory of that. But the Green New Deal people want to shoot two birds with one stone. They want to have green investments for ecological sustainability and for a locomotive of growth. There is a limit to growth also. Most of the Green New Deal people don't share the idea of zero growth. There is that cohort that stands a bit away from the Green New Deal people. They don't talk about rebound effects, and I think in our circles, for example, in the campaign against climate change, 1 million jobs for climate change, against climate change, our pamphlet also doesn't really talk about rebound effects. What are these? If we invest in renewable energy, if we increase efficiency in renewable energy, that will decrease energy costs. Very good for working people. That will increase the real incomes of the households. As long as we don't change the perception and what we do with our incomes, they will basically increase energy in non-energy consumption. Too bad Natalie Bennett has left. But when she said with our shorter work week we could fly off to Prague, it's exactly what we don't want. We don't want to limit, of course, the mobility of people, but this is not what we want. When we make energy more efficient and we give more time to people, we want to control greenhouse gas emissions. So, and one more problem of the Green New Deal or the zero growth proposals that come from parts of the economists that don't actually have a clear account of what capitalism is not, is that they don't talk about redistribution a whole lot. They don't talk about redistribution between wages and profits to reconcile sustainable development and equality and climate change. So, what is the alternative to that? An eco-socialist alternative that doesn't rely on exponential growth. That's an alternative that is to mobilize all the tools we have to address the multiple dimensions of the crisis, ranging from the jobs crisis, so we need to have a policy for full employment, also for equality, and for ecological sustainability all at once. Now, I do accept very much, and I think we have to be clear about that, sustainability and climate justice at the same time. And with climate justice, I'm talking about the distribution of carbon emissions across the world. We can't emit too much here, we have to leave space for India and China to emit. Now, India and China still need a lot more growth to come at a decent living standard for their population. They need to achieve a housing stock that gives decent housing for all. They need to achieve investments that will give decent jobs for all at decent living standards. Now they need to grow, there's no doubt about that. Here, do we need more growth? We have generated a lot of growth and wealth in that part of the world. We need to redistribute that. We need to redistribute and manage with the wealth we have, such that in the other parts of the world, they still have space for carbon emissions and for growth. Now, so if you combine the idea of sustainability, there is a limit to how much carbon we can emit to the atmosphere. That was in the discussion in the opening panel. And redistribution of the needs for growth and carbon emissions across the world. In this part of the world, it's very clear we need to manage with low growth, if not zero growth. And I'm open to discussing also degrowth. It's a different matter. For the moment, just for the sake of the argument, let's say managing with low growth. How do we do that? How do we manage with low growth, but at the same time manage or hit our other targets about decent living standard, jobs with dignity for all? For me, that is going through 3 routes. Green jobs agenda, yes, I'm totally for that. Public jobs, investing in public infrastructure, creating green jobs. There's obviously transfer to renewable energy, housing, as well as ecological repair and maintenance. Because if you don't do that, we will not be able to move on. We have to repair the damage that has been already done to ecology, and it's costly. It requires public investment. Green public investment, fine. If you have to have, say, not 2% or 3% annual growth, but 0 growth or 0.5% growth, how can we manage to create jobs for all with just that low growth? Well, certainly not only with green jobs, but luckily there is also a lot of jobs we need, a lot of public investment we need to do in very labor-intensive social services. Education, health, plus of course care. Care for the elderly, care for the children. This is what feminist economists like myself, well, I'm an eco-socialist feminist economist, we started calling these purple jobs. We don't need just green jobs, we need purple jobs. The color purple, somebody asked me in Left Unity, I was surprised, what does it refer to? It refers to feminism. Purple jobs are not just jobs for women, they're jobs for men and women in care, health, education, but they're purple because they will free the invisible, unpaid job that's predominantly being done by women in the households, in the private sphere at the moment, the caring jobs. We need to turn these jobs to public jobs, publicly financed and decently paid jobs. I don't have much time, but the third thing, of course I totally agree when Natalie said shorten the working hours. If we look at how much we are working today compared to 19th century, we are all part-timers. This is something we have achieved in the working class movement in the past century. The progress has stopped predominantly after the 80s, or it took the form of voluntary acceptance of shorter hours with pay cuts. What we need to think is shorter hours with redistribution, meaning shorter hours, but for workers below the average pay, at least no pay cut in hourly rates. So for them, they will get the same income, if not more, but have shorter hours. And of course, on the top of the income distribution, we need to redistribute. Of course, it all has to be embedded in the eco-socialist paradigm. In my -1 minute, we need to seriously talk about public ownership in key sectors, and that's something that can be discussed in a democratic discussion very easily with the broad labor movement. It's about the decommodification of basic needs and ecological sustainability. So let's start by defining key sectors. For me, the key sectors where we can't really wait for private investment, we can't even allow private ownership, is housing, energy, infrastructure, pension, education, health and care, and I leave it to the discussion of the labour movement to discuss what else. And of course, when we talk about public ownership, we don't mean a technocratic, bureaucratic ownership, but the decision making is to involve workers, users of the services, regional representation, and has to be transparent. Right, I stop here, and this leaves us with. Thank you. Shall we, or just collect and we wrap up at the end? How do you?
Oh yeah.
Because we have talked a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm.
That's a good idea, yeah.
Why don't you chair?
Yes,
It's
I
not
was going to
organized.
suggest that. So my name is Roger Cobley, I'm from OS21. I'm meant to be one of the organisers of this conference. I apologise for why the chair didn't show up. I'm not sure who was actually meant to be chairing this session. So
Well,
I've